The first thing you should know about being dead is that it's boring. The second thing is that you can't unhear things. My own personal spectral hell was being forced to watch my stepmother and stepbrother celebrate my demise. My body, still warm on the hospital bed, was little more than a decorative centerpiece for their victory party. From my ghostly corner of the room, I watched Serafina, my wicked stepmother, peel the foil from a bottle of champagne. The pop of the cork was obscene in the sterile quiet. Finally, she sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. She filled two flutes, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. Julian, my oafish stepbrother, took a sip and had the audacity to grimace. Is this the good stuff? It tastes a little subpar, Mother. It's the best they had in the gift shop, darling, Serafina cooed, waving a dismissive hand towards my corpse. We'll buy a vineyard tomorrow. We can afford it now. They clinked their glasses together. The sound echoed in the room, a death knell for the naive girl I used to be. My own murder toasted with cheap champagne. To a flawless execution, Julian said with a smirk, his eyes glinting with a greed so profound it was almost impressive. And to Alara, Serafina added, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. She was so helpful in the end, so trusting. Helpful, trusting. Those were the words they used for a fool, and I had been the biggest fool of them all. Just 48 hours earlier, my world had shattered. My father, the brilliant, laughing anchor of my life, was gone. A sudden, aggressive illness, the doctors had said. 1 minute he was planning a trip to see the cherry blossoms in Japan, the next he was gone. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy cloak that smothered my senses and my sanity. Serafina, his wife of 5 years, transformed into a masterpiece of public mourning. Her sobs were perfectly timed, her face a mask of tragic beauty. Julian hovered nearby, a shadow of feigned concern, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt like a spider. They cornered me the day after the funeral. The dining room table, a place of so many happy family memories, was their chosen battleground. It was covered in funeral wreaths and sympathy cards, the air thick with the scent of lilies and deceit. Alara, darling, Serafina began, her voice a soft, manipulative purr. She slid a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. I know this is a terrible time, but we must be practical. I stared at the document. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, meaningless squiggles. I could barely remember my own name, let alone decipher the intricacies of corporate law. It's just to consolidate the assets, Julian explained, leaning in. His breath smelled faintly of the expensive whiskey he'd been drinking all morning. To make things easier, Dad would have wanted us to stick together, to keep the Vance empire stable. It's what your father would have wanted, the magic words, the key to my compliance. My grief-stricken brain latched onto that phrase, a lifeline in a sea of sorrow. If it was what he wanted, I would do it. I would have signed my own death warrant if they'd told me he'd wanted it. Which, as it turned out, I did. My pen hovered over the signature line. My hand trembled. Are you sure? I whispered, a final pathetic plea from my gut instinct. Serafina's eyes welled with perfectly formed tears. Oh, Ilara, after all these years, you still see me as the evil stepmother, don't you? I loved your father. My only wish is to honor his legacy. With Julian. With you. As a family. That did it. The guilt she expertly wielded was the final push. I scribbled my name, my signature a messy, tear-blotted surrender. I signed away my birthright, the multi-billion-dollar tech empire my father had built from nothing, to the two people who were about to erase me from existence. The aftermath was brutally efficient. A week later, the locks on my family home were changed. My access to the company servers was revoked. My bank accounts, once flush with the kind of allowance that could buy a small car, contained nothing but dust and echoes. They didn't just take my inheritance, they took my identity. They launched a quiet but vicious smear campaign. I was unstable, grief-stricken and delusional, making wild accusations. Friends stopped calling. Business contacts I'd known my whole life suddenly had full schedules. The stress manifested as a real physical illness. Crushing migraines, stomach issues, a deep, gnawing fatigue. I ended up in a dingy one-bedroom apartment that smelled of damp and despair. My life had shrunk to 4 peeling walls. The final act of their play came disguised as charity. Julian appeared at my door one rainy afternoon holding a care package. It contained expensive tea, some gourmet biscuits, and a large bottle of prescription-strength pain medication. "For your migraines," he'd said, his face a perfect mask of concern. "Mother was so worried. We just want you to feel better." I was so broken, so desperate for a lifeline that I believed him. That night, the headache was a monster. I took the pills. I remember a brief moment of peace as the pain receded, then a creeping coldness, a slowing of my own thoughts. My last conscious thought in that miserable life was one of startling clarity. "Well played, you monsters. Well played." Then darkness. A brief, silent, boring darkness. Until the champagne cork popped. A gasp tore from my throat, raw and painful, but there was no pain. My lungs filled with clean, fresh air that didn't smell of damp or decay. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't in a ghostly corner or a bleak apartment. I was in my bed. My real, honest-to-God, 4-poster canopy bed in my sun-drenched room at the Vance estate. The sheets were 1,200 thread-count Egyptian cotton, and the only scent was the faint aroma of fresh freesias from the vase on my nightstand. I shot upright, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was impossible. A dream? A very specific, very cruel hallucination brought on by a fatal overdose? I scrambled out of bed and snatched my phone from its charger. The screen lit up, bright and unforgiving. The date stared back at me, a digital ghost from the past. It was exactly 1 month before my father's death. My legs gave out and I sank to the plush carpet, the phone clattering from my numb fingers. It was real, the room, the date, the healthy, solid feeling of my own body. I wasn't a ghost, I wasn't dead, I was back. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the vast, gilt-edged mirror. The face looking back was mine, but not the one I remembered. This face was unlined by stress, the eyes clear and bright, not haunted by betrayal. The naive, trusting girl I had been stared back at me, and I felt a surge of pity for her. She had no idea what was coming. But I did. Just then, the door to my bedroom creaked open. "Ellie, you up already?" My breath caught. That voice, I would have known it anywhere. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat. My father stood in the doorway, vibrant and alive. He was dressed in his favorite weekend attire, a soft cashmere sweater and jeans, a coffee mug in his hand, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at me. He was here. He was real. The tears I'd held back for what felt like an eternity finally broke free. I launched myself at him, burying my face in his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of his coffee and subtle cologne. Sobs racked my body, great gulping things that were a mix of profound joy and soul-deep terror. "Whoa, sweetheart, what's all this?" He held me tight, stroking my hair. "Bad dream?" I pulled back, wiping my eyes furiously. "Something like that," I choked out. "Just really, really happy to see you." He smiled, that warm, reassuring smile that had always made the world feel safe. "I'm happy to see you too, kiddo. Now get dressed. I was thinking we could hit the driving range today." He left, and the moment he was gone, the warmth in the room vanished, replaced by an arctic chill. I turned back to the mirror. The tears were gone. The naive girl in the reflection was gone too. In her place was someone else. Someone colder, harder. Someone who had seen the end and been given a second chance at the beginning. I looked at my own reflection, at the eyes that now held the memory of my own murder. A vow formed in the silence of my mind, not with fire and passion, but with ice and precision. I wasn't going to just stop them. Oh no, that was far too simple, too merciful. I was going to let them think they were winning. I was going to give them enough rope to not just hang themselves, but to tie a fancy, elaborate bow with it first. I would let them build their entire house of cards, every lie, every stolen dollar, every drop of poison, just so I could be the one to flick the match and watch their world burn to the ground. I was going to reclaim everything, not just the money or the company. I was going to reclaim my life, my father's legacy, and my own damn soul. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The first time was a tragedy, I thought. The words a silent promise to the universe. This time, it's a comedy, and I'm writing all the punchlines. The next morning, I walked into my father's study, a room I had previously avoided like it was perpetually on fire. It was the heart of his empire, filled with books on coding, business strategy, and walls adorned with framed patents. "Dad?" I said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up from his computer, surprised. "Ellie, everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said, giving him a bright, purposeful smile. "I've been thinking. I've spent my whole life enjoying the fruits of your labor. I think it's time I learned how the garden grows. I want you to mentor me. I want to learn the business." The shock on his face was comical. In my first life, my only interest in Vance Industries was the quarterly dividend check. But now, seeing the pleased, proud look that slowly replaced his surprise, I knew I'd made the right move. "I'd love that, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd love nothing more." Phase 1 was complete. I was in. My new position as my father's special apprentice gave me unprecedented access, which I used to subtly turn my attention to my dear stepbrother, Julian. In my past life, he was a talentless artist with a taste for luxury he couldn't afford. This time, I decided to become his biggest cheerleader. I found him sketching in the solarium, his work as uninspired as ever. "Julian, this is incredible," I gushed, picking up a truly awful charcoal drawing of a wilting flower. "You have so much raw talent. It's a crime you're not in a gallery." He preened under the praise. "You think so?" "I know so," I said with utter conviction. "In fact, I know a dealer. A very exclusive private dealer who works with emerging artists. I could make an introduction." The dealer, a man named Mr. Silas, was actually a private investigator I'd hired with the last of my savings from my first life. A rainy day fund Serafina had somehow missed. Mr. Silas was a master of disguise and deception. He sold Julian a series of expensive forgeries, praising his impeccable eye for talent. Julian, high on his own ego, used Serafina's credit cards to buy them, convinced he was building a priceless collection. Next, I nurtured his inner tech mogul. "You're so creative, Julian," I said over lunch one day. "You should be channeling that into something disruptive, like an app." His eyes lit up. "An app?" "Yes. I heard you talking about that idea for a social network based on, what was it, sharing pictures of your meals?" "Gourmetgram," he exclaimed, "for the discerning foodie." It was, objectively, the stupidest idea I had ever heard. It already existed in a dozen different forms. But I sold it to him like it was the next big thing. I even helped him write the business proposal, carefully lacing it with enough flawed logic and unrealistic projections that it was doomed to fail. He pitched it to Dad with me and Serafina in the room. Serafina, eager to promote her darling boy, even offered to put up the seed money from her personal accounts. Dad, playing his part, looked skeptical but agreed to let Julian run with it under the watchful eye of the board. Serafina was a more delicate target. She was a snake, and you don't attack a snake head-on. You charm it, you study it, you wait for it to expose its own belly. My approach was one of feigned digital incompetence. "Serafina, you're so good with this stuff," I said one afternoon, gesturing to the family iMac in the library. I was trying to look up villas in Tuscany for a hypothetical trip, and I must have clicked on a pop-up. Look at this weird site. I left the screen open on a page for a highly discreet, ultra-expensive offshore real estate firm, one that specialized in hidden assets and anonymous purchases. A page that I knew, from my first life's memories, she had frequented. She paled slightly as she looked at it. "Oh, that's just spam, dear," she said, quickly closing the window. "You have to be careful." "You're right," I said sweetly. "You know, with Dad's work, security is so important. I was thinking, for his birthday, we should get him a full security upgrade for the house, especially for his office. You know, top-of-the-line cameras, the works. Just for peace of mind." Her smile was tight, strained. "What a thoughtful idea, Alara." She knew exactly what I was doing. I was building a cage around her. And the most beautiful part was that I was making her watch me do it, bar by glittering bar. Chapter 4, The First Twist. A week later, my father called me into his study. The air was heavy and the usual warmth of the room felt muted. My heart started to beat a little faster. Was this it? Had I pushed too hard? He didn't ask me to sit. He just stood by the fireplace, his back to me, staring into the unlit hearth. "The new security system is excellent," he said, his voice low and even. "The resolution on the cameras is remarkable." I stayed silent, my hands clasped behind my back. "Remarkable enough," he continued, turning to face me, "to see Serafina attempting to guess the password to my digital safe at 3 in the morning, and remarkable enough to see Julian using his new company card to buy a $1,000 bottle of wine for a lunch meeting that never happened." He paused, his eyes searching mine. This was the moment of truth. "But what I don't understand," he said, taking a step closer, "is you. Your sudden interest in the business. Your encouragement of Julian's foolishness. Your very specific security suggestions. It's like you know exactly where to look. It's like you know what they're going to do before they do it." My breath hitched. I had prepared a dozen lies, a dozen plausible explanations. But looking into his tired, knowing eyes, I realized the truth was the only card I had left to play. It was a gamble. A massive one. He could think I was insane. He could have me committed. But he was the man who had taught me to code at age 10. He valued logic, data, and evidence. So I gave him data. "In my first life," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "you die in 3 weeks. The doctors call it a sudden illness. It's not. It's poison. Serafina has been administering it in your evening tea for months. After you're gone, they make me sign over my inheritance. Then they kill me." I laid it all out. The coercion, the smear campaign, my lonely death, the champagne toast over my body. I told him everything, my voice gaining strength with every horrific detail I recounted. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. I expected shouting, disbelief, a call to a psychiatrist. Instead, he walked over to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a thin medical file. He slid it across the desk to me. "My doctor has been my friend for 30 years, he said quietly. He noticed elevated levels of thallium in my blood work 2 months ago. A rare, heavy metal. Hard to detect unless you're specifically looking for it, odorless, tasteless. The sudden illness I was supposed to develop would have been catastrophic organ failure." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "I've been taking a chelating agent ever since," he continued, his voice hardening, "flushing it from my system. I suspected it was Serafina, but I had no proof. I couldn't believe she would, but the evidence was there. I faked my worsening symptoms. I needed to see what she would do. I needed to see what you would do, Ellie. I needed to know if you were strong enough to see the snakes in your own garden." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of the burden he'd been carrying alone. The pain, the betrayal, the fear for my safety. "I didn't expect you to come back from the dead to help me, though," he added, a flicker of his old humor in his eyes. "That's a new one." A tear slid down my cheek, but this time it wasn't from grief or fear, it was from relief. I wasn't alone anymore. The game hadn't changed. It had just gained a new player. It was no longer just me against them, it was us. "So," I said, wiping the tear away and feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated power, "what's our next move?" My father smiled, a true predatory smile that I had inherited. "Our next move, kiddo," he said, "is to let them build us a beautiful, airtight case, and then we lower the boom." With my father as my silent partner, the game escalated. We were no longer just planting seeds, we were setting traps. And our dear Serafina and Julian, blinded by greed and arrogance, were walking straight into them. Their panic was palpable. My father began openly favoring me in business meetings, praising my keen insights and natural acumen. He shut down Julian's Gourmetgram app after the initial disastrous launch cost Serafina a hefty 6 figures. Julian was furious, and Serafina was starting to look less like a grieving widow in waiting and more like a cornered animal. They knew they were losing their grip, and that made them reckless. They decided to go for the kill shot, Their plan, in retrospect, was almost laughably cliché. They were going to frame me for corporate espionage. I knew it was coming. In my first life, whispers of my instability were coupled with rumors that I'd tried to sell company secrets. This time, I was ready. Working with Dad and our head of cybersecurity, a woman named Anya who owed her career to my father and despised Serafina, we prepared the bait. "They'll need to plant something on your laptop," Anya said, her fingers flying across a keyboard in her sterile, server-filled office. "Something that proves you've been communicating with a competitor." "Specifically with Kenji Tanaka at Ronin Corp," I said. Tanaka was my father's biggest rival, a man he respected but didn't trust. It was the most logical, most damaging choice. "Okay," Anya said with a sly grin. "So, we'll let them. We'll create a ghost file. It will look like Ronin Corp's source code for their new AI project, but it will be our own code, watermarked and traceable down to the nanosecond it's accessed. And we'll add a little cherry on top." The cherry was a backdoor beacon. The moment the file was opened on any computer outside the Vance Industries network, it would ping us with its exact location. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for the rats to take the cheese. I made it easy for them. I complained loudly over dinner about my laptop acting glitchy and said I was leaving it at the office overnight for the IT department to look at. "You work too hard, darling," Serafina said, her eyes gleaming with false sympathy. "You should take a break. In fact, your father and I are going to the Philharmonic tomorrow night. You should join us." It was the perfect alibi, gift-wrapped and handed to me. "You know, I think I will," I said. "I could use a night out." The next evening, I sat beside my father at the concert hall, dressed in a stunning evening gown, looking for all the world like a dutiful, relaxed daughter. My phone, however, was in my lap. At 9:15 p.m., during a particularly dramatic crescendo in a Mozart symphony, it vibrated. A single, discreet message from Anya. "Target acquired. The mouse is in the house." My personal assistant, Maria, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman whom Serafina had tried to fire in my first life and whom I had immediately promoted, had stayed late, under the guise of catching up on paperwork. The footage she sent me from the miniature camera we'd installed in a potted plant was beautiful. It showed Julian, dressed in black, furtively sneaking into my office, pulling a USB drive from his pocket and inserting it into my laptop. The transfer took less than a minute. He was clumsy, sweating, and utterly caught. I showed the phone screen to my father. He glanced at the video, then back at the orchestra, and a small, satisfied smile touched his lips. The music had never sounded so sweet. Chapter 6, the second twist. We had them. The evidence was irrefutable. We could have lowered the boom right then and there. But my private investigator, Mr. Silas, called me the next morning with a discovery that added a whole new layer of delicious complexity to the situation. "You were right to have me keep digging into Julian's background, Miss Vance," he said, his voice crackling over the phone. "It's unconventional." "I'm listening," I said, settling into my office chair. His official records state his deceased father was a British aristocrat named Alastair Finch. That man did exist, but he was sterile, a childhood case of the mumps. There is no possible way he could have fathered a child. I sat up straighter. "So who is his father?" "This is where it gets interesting," Silas said. "I ran the DNA we discreetly acquired from that water bottle he left at our last art meeting. It got a familial match in the federal prison database." My blood ran cold. "A match with who?" "A man named Marcus Thorne." The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne, a ruthless corporate raider, a man known for his scorched earth tactics, and the one true enemy my father had ever made in the business world. My father hadn't just beaten him in a massive hostile takeover battle 10 years ago. He had uncovered evidence of Thorne's massive fraud, which had landed him in a maximum security prison with a 20-year sentence. "Are you certain?" I breathed. 100%. Julian isn't just some freeloader, Miss Vance. He's the son of your father's greatest enemy. Serafina must have had an affair with Thorne just before he was incarcerated. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a simple story of greed. This was a long-con revenge plot. Julian wasn't just trying to get rich, he was trying to destroy the man who imprisoned his real father. He wasn't Serafina's weak-willed puppet. He was a viper she'd nurtured, thinking he was a harmless garden snake. He was playing his own game, and I had a sinking feeling he was planning on cutting his own mother out of the picture the moment he got what he wanted. I hung up the phone, a slow, wicked smile spreading across my face. Oh, this was so much better than I could have ever imagined. The final confrontation wasn't just going to be a trial, it was going to be a Shakespearean tragedy, and I had a front row seat. I immediately called my father. "Dad," I said, unable to keep the glee from my voice, "you are not going to believe this." The emergency board meeting was Serafina's idea. She and Julian had called it, confident they held the executioner's axe. They walked into the boardroom on the top floor of Vance Tower with an air of theatrical gravity, their faces somber, their eyes alight with victory. The room was packed. The entire board of directors, the company's general counsel, my father, and me. I sat to my father's right, projecting an aura of calm, bored indifference. Inside, my nerves were singing with anticipation. Showtime. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Serafina began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "It is with the heaviest of hearts that we have uncovered a grave betrayal. A betrayal that threatens the very foundation of this company." Julian, standing beside her, placed a laptop on the table. "We have discovered that Alara has been colluding with our chief competitor, Ronin Corp. She has been feeding them proprietary data, including the source code for our upcoming Sentinel AI project." Gasps rippled through the room. The board members, a collection of stern, gray-haired men and women, looked at me with varying degrees of shock and disappointment. I met their gazes without flinching. "This is a baseless accusation," my father said, his voice a low growl. "Is it?" Julian challenged, his confidence surging. He clicked a button and emails appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. Forged emails, showing correspondence between me and Kenji Tanaka. "We have digital proof, and we have the file she downloaded onto her machine, ready for transfer." He looked at me, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Ilara?" I leaned forward, a small smile playing on my lips. "I do, actually. A few things." I looked to Anya, who was standing discreetly by the door. She gave me a slight nod. "First," I said, my voice clear and carrying across the room, "that file you found is indeed very interesting. Anya, would you care to elaborate?" Anya stepped forward. "The file Mr. Vance discovered is a ghost file, created by our security team. It contains traceable code. It was downloaded onto Miss Vance's laptop at 9:17 p.m. last night, which is curious because at that exact time, Miss Vance was at the Philharmonic with her father and several hundred witnesses." The color drained from Julian's face. "So the question is," I continued, my voice as sharp as glass, "how did the file get there? Perhaps this will shed some light on the matter." I nodded to Anya again. The screen flickered and the forged emails were replaced by high-definition security footage. The boardroom watched in stunned silence as a figure in black, unmistakably Julian, crept into my office and planted the USB drive. Serafina shot to her feet. "This is doctored, a trick." "Is it?" I purred. "Then perhaps you can explain this." The video was replaced by an audio file. Serafina's voice filled the room, conspiratorial and venomous, from a conversation I had recorded weeks ago. Audio Serafina. "He's getting stronger, Julian. The poison isn't working fast enough. We need to discredit Alara completely. If she takes over, we get nothing." Audio Julian. "Don't worry, Mother. The espionage plan will ruin her. By the time Dad finally kicks the bucket, she'll be a pariah. The board will have no choice but to appoint me." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye was now on Serafina and Julian, who looked like they had been turned to stone. Then, the final glorious betrayal. Julian, seeing the armed security guards moving towards them, panicked. The mask of the devoted son fell away, replaced by the face of a desperate rat. "It was her!" he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at his own mother. "It was all her idea. The poison, the frame-up, everything. I just did what she told me to do." Serafina looked at him, her face a mask of pure shock and horror. Julian, no. She's a monster, he raved, his eyes wild. She was obsessed with getting revenge on the Vances. She was having an affair with Marcus Thorne for years. He's my real father. She was doing it all for him. He threw his own mother under the bus, then reversed over her for good measure. It was more spectacular than I could have ever dreamed. The revelation of his true parentage hung in the air, a final, scandalous bomb that obliterated any shred of their credibility. That was my father's cue. He stood up slowly, not like a sick man, but like a king reclaiming his throne. He looked healthier and more powerful than he had in months. "Thank you, Julian," he said, his voice cold as a winter storm, "for your comprehensive confession." He addressed the stunned board. "For the past few months, my daughter and I have been conducting an internal investigation. We have medical evidence of Serafina's poisoning attempts. We have financial records of Julian embezzling company funds for his art collection and his failed app. And now we have this." He gestured around the room. "Serafina, you are disowned. Your prenuptial agreement is void due to the criminal activity clause. You will leave my house and my life, and you will face the full extent of the law." She crumpled into her chair, a broken woman. He then turned his gaze on Julian. It was not anger, but a profound, weary pity. "As for you, your biological father is a con man, and it seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Every single one of those investments Alara encouraged you to make was a carefully orchestrated sting. The money you took from your mother, the loans you took against your forged art collection, it's all gone. You are officially and completely bankrupt." Julian stared, his mouth agape, the final realization dawning on him. He hadn't just lost. He had been masterfully played from the very beginning. My father turned back to the board, his authority absolute. Now to the final order of business, with the position of COO now vacant due to moral failings. I am officially nominating a new candidate to lead Vance Industries into the future. A candidate with the intelligence, strength, and foresight this company deserves. I nominate Alara Vance as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. A unanimous vote of approval echoed through the room. I stood up, shook my father's hand, and looked out at the empire that was now mine to command. Checkmate. The fallout was swift and merciless. Serafina and Julian's names became a citywide punchline, their scandals splashed across every news outlet. Their carefully constructed social world evaporated overnight. The same people who had fawned over them now crossed the street to avoid their gaze. Serafina, stripped of her wealth and status, faced a barrage of criminal charges, with Marcus Thorne facing a few new ones himself for conspiring from his prison cell. Julian, broke and disowned, vanished into the kind of obscurity he had always feared. I didn't watch them burn. I was too busy rising from the ashes. A few weeks later, I stood in the CEO's office. My office. It had been my father's, but he had happily retired to a consultative role, declaring he was far more interested in perfecting his golf swing and finally taking that trip to see the cherry blossoms. The office was on the highest floor, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the sprawling city below. The view was limitless. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the 1,000 windows of the skyscrapers that formed my new kingdom. I had reclaimed everything they had taken from me and so much more. It wasn't just the money, the house, or the company. It was the feeling of power that hummed under my skin. A power I had earned not through birthright, but through fire and cunning. I had my father back, healthier and happier than I'd seen him in years. I had my future, a vast, open landscape of my own design. I had my self-respect. I ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the massive mahogany desk, my desk, and smiled. They say you can't take it with you when you go. A lovely sentiment, but factually inaccurate. Turns out, if you're reborn with a vengeance, you can come back and take it all, and trust me, the second time around, everything is so much sweeter. I took a sip of the ridiculously expensive scotch my father had left as a congratulatory gift and looked out at the glittering city lights. A whole world of possibilities. Now, who wants to stage a hostile takeover?